Okay, now that we have an understanding of inline and embedded CSS, let's begin to write some CSS in here and some different declarations that can add definitely some style into our page. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my body here that I have a light gray applied and kind of a dark gray font applied, and I'm going to change the font family, and the font family is where you can change the font that's being displayed on here. So we're going to pick Verdana, and let's take a look at that. So I refresh it and you can see how that font all changed. Now if for whatever reason I don't have that installed on my computer, I'm going to do a comma and I'm going to give a different type. So maybe I want Arial to be my kind of secondary fallback font. And if I don't have either of those installed, then we can move on to a font family. And here is a list of the different font families and kind of what they look like. But you know, I could do something like a cursive if I wanted to. And what this would do is just allow, you know, it would pick whatever cursive font is installed on your computer. Now, if you have a font like Times New Roman or something like that, you do have to put these in quotations for it to come through. Anytime you have spaces, you have to put that. But if it's just a one word, you're fine doing it this way. So that's how that works with these font families. Is they're just whatever fonts you want in a to fall back to, and then you fall back to the font family. Now, if for whatever reason you have a font installed on your computer, right? You go out, you download fonts or something, and you go find some font on font.com that you really like. And I wouldn't recommend using a lot of these, but there are times you'll download like a font you want to use, okay? So at that time, what you can do is at the very top of your CSS, whether this be embedded or external, and we'll show you what that is here in a little bit. What you do is you do an @font face, you do a little @ sign, @font face, and in curly braces you put font family : and then the name you wish to give it. So this could be my first font, for example, semicolon. Then you do a source, and then you say : URL myfontfile.ttf. I think those need to be actually in quotations if I'm not mistaken. So what that does is it takes that font file and associates it with my first font. And then down here you could put my first font and run it that way. And it would go out on your server where, again, you kind of think of this as a relative location, like we talked about before, not an absolute. So it's going to look to see where this file is or where your CSS is in relation to that, and look for that file. So you can load your own fonts on here if you want to. Another option, if you like it, is to look at Google Fonts. Now, Google Fonts is a great tool. You can look up all kinds of fun fonts. Let's go look up Lato here. And you can kind of look to see if you like what it looks like, right? And if you do like it, we'll go ahead and we want to select a thin, maybe a light, 300, regular, 700, 900, stuff like that, okay? And you could download this to your computer and use the @font face to install it, and you run it on your computer. But it might be a little bit easier to use this embedded code right here. And what this does is it links out to the Google servers, which is much faster than your server. So I'm going to post that right there, or paste that right there, and you can see it's going to go out and link up the hyperlink reference out to the Google fonts, and it's going to load up our Lato font and with the according weights right here and do that. And so now what I can do is I can go in here to my font family and just use Lato. I can put that in little quotes there, just kind of like this. You can, well, there's a perfect example right there, font family, and even their backup font, which is a font or sans serif font. So now when I load that up, you can see that font is now applied. It's a specific font from Google Fonts, and it looks a little bit nicer. Now, if we wish to change some of these fonts. So let's say our header, we want to make a little bit larger. Now right now, if you remember, CSS first inherits the browser defaults, and then it will look at any kind of external CSS, and then embedded CSS, and then inline CSS. So right now our default size is probably like 200% or something like that. And so we're going to do a font size, and we're going to change this. Let's say we want to make this 45 pixels tall, all right? And we refresh that. You can see how that's got to be much larger. Now the problem that comes up with dealing with fonts in pixels is not all computers are created equal. Some computers are have a really high pixel count, while others have a really low pixel count. If your computer is older than 5 years, there's a good chance, or even if you've got a computer, it's like a $300 computer or something, there's a good chance that the screen you're running is running to 72 DPI or PPI. And what that means is there's, for every inch across the screen, there's 72 dots per inch, or pixels per inch for DPI or PPI, right? But if you open your phone, and if you have a modern cell phone, there's a good chance it's running above 300 DPI or PPI, right? And so it just holds a much tighter resolution. And so if I was to say that my font size is 45 pixels across, okay, and I show this on a monitor that has 72 DPI or PPI, that's almost around halfway across an inch, so like about half an inch. But if we look on a monitor that has a 300 or 400 DPI or PPI, and we look at how much that is per inch, it's significantly smaller. So with a higher resolution computer or screen, your fonts will show up really, really tiny, okay? And that can be a problem because we don't want all of our fonts to be super tiny. So it really brings us back to two types of units of measurement within the web. And we have, these are two categories. We have absolute widths and we have relative. Okay, and so we showed you that 45 pixels, and we could also say something like our fonts are going to be, 2 centimeters or 20 millimeters or 1 inch or points. You probably got used to those in Microsoft Word, for example. They typically run their fonts at like 11 point size, or picas if you've used those before. But these are all absolute, and they're going to show up different on different monitors, and so that could be a big problem. So we really want to move into relative units of measurement. So if I say that my font is going to be 100%, and we go back and look at it, 100% is, well, in this case, it's what it used to be right there. Let's not do it on this header. Let's do it with the paragraph here. Actually, let's do it to our body font. And so we're going to say everything's going to be 100%, and I'll refresh that. Now, we do have some browser stuff getting overwritten here. Let's change that up to 200%. And you can see everything is twice as big. Now, the problem with that is this heading got larger too, right? The reason is I'm saying everything in my body is going to be 200, but the header then makes everything a little bit larger on itself. So that could be a little bit of a problem. We also see this issue with a type called EMS, okay? So EM, and that literally stands for the letter M, and the width of the letter M is roughly 100%, right? And so if we say everything is going to be 1M, you can see that come through. So if I say everything's going to be 2M, it's going to be 200%, kind of like what we did before. So I'm going to go to 1M, and I'm going to leave it at that. And then I'm going to go into my paragraph, and I'm going to say that my paragraph has a font size of 2Ms, okay? And I'll refresh that, and you can see my paragraph got twice as big here. One problem with M's that you find is if I change that to 2M, you'd expect all fonts to go to 2M. However, what happens is that this font right here went twice as big. It's roughly 4M now, and this is 2M. And so you get a compounding effect where everything goes into 2, and then this one would essentially double it because it's looking at its parent and doubles that. So it's like a 2 times 2. And so one thing I recommend to a lot of students is not playing with M's, I look at it that way, but playing with rems. And rems will make sure that they look at the root element, and that's basically looking at your HTML and what that is defined as. And so when I say my body's going to be 2rem, you can see it's all 2rem, right? And when I say my paragraph's going to be 2rem, or let's go down to 1rem, even though our body's different, it's going to be 100% that it was like it was before. And so moving forward, I recommend to most of my students that they should probably using rems for their units of measurement, especially when working with fonts, because it shows up the way you intend it to be. There's some others in here you can use. Character sizes of the CH, sometimes viewport width and viewport height is kind of fun. It depends on how big your screen is, will determine how big your browser is. And there's some others, but these are all relative. And to be honest with you, again, rems are probably where everybody wants to be in working this semester. So I'm going to go ahead and take off this body here. And this paragraph, I'm going to take that off. And I'm going to allow that just to go back to normal. Okay. And if we wanted to change our heading 1, I need to be more specific on what I'm working on there, because the header just is the parent, right? It's the header, but the H1 has its own browser defaults already applied to it. So if I do want to change that, I do have to say H1 font size is going to be, let's go 3rem or something like that. And that's where, we're going to be able to change that and be more specific. All right, so let's take and work on our H1, and let's play with a font weight. And by default, fonts are going to come in H1, header 1 through header 6 as bold, right? And so what we can do is we can look at it normal now, and we can change those browser defaults back to something else. And you can see that bold has been taken off. We can apply the bold back if we want to. And you can see that it's been made bold there. But our font here, this Lato that we installed, if you remember, I went back and I installed different weights here to it. And if your font supports it, most fonts don't unless they're a more higher end font, and fonts from Google typically will have this. Adobe fonts will have it. Things that you get from dafont.com probably won't. But what we can do with this is, rather than saying bold, is now we can feed it a number like 100, and you can see we have our thin 100 that we installed. And so I refresh it, you can see how that's been made all thin. And we got a 300, we can look at that one, and we got a 400, I think, and 500 all the way up to, I think we got a 700 or maybe even a 900. Yeah, we got a 900. So we can go ultra thick, often this is called black, and we can see a really big font weight on this. We can also look at the font style if we choose to. On this H1, let's do a font, oops, not size, style, and we can add italics to it. Kind of like the italics tag or the emphasize tag would add that, but you can go through and add it, and you could turn it off if you want to. So you could make all italics if you wanted to, normal. I'm going to take that off though, because I don't really like that for my heading. Let's work with line height. Now, paragraphs, I always felt like they are a little too tight in here, and one thing I like to do early on is just change these over to maybe like a 1.25 rem or something, and you can see how it just opens up a little bit more. It's not crazy, maybe 1.5, and opens it up a little bit more and makes this a little bit more legible than this right here. Let's go back to 1.25. The line height just can take your paragraphs and put a little extra line height in between. And again, we probably want to be using rems other than pixel sizes, because pixels, depending on the device you're looking at, is going to be much smaller or much larger. So we're going to keep with that. Let's go up to our H1 here, and we're going to use text align. And with text align, we can center things now. We can right align them if we want to. In this case, maybe we want to go ahead and center our logo right in the middle of the page. So text align is really good for aligning a body of text. You apply it to a paragraph, you apply it to a div, something in that nature. But that's how you do that. Okay, next we want to work with text indent. We're going to apply this to our paragraph. Okay, so we'll do a text indent, and let's say that we're going to indent 5 rem. And I'll do that, and you can see how it's basically gone over 5 rem on there. This is way too much. Let's look at 2 here really quick. Brings in a little bit. Can take our paragraph and just give a little indentation. Nothing too special. Let's look at our anchor tags. Okay, and on this one, I'm going to apply the text dash decoration. And text dash decoration, you can do an overline above it, you can do an underline if you want to, but we have an underline right now, and you can strike it out if you want to, but we're going to turn that to none, so our underlines disappear, and you see how those all disappear. Now, one thing I see a lot of students mess up on is they'll apply it to a nav, or they'll apply it to a UL or an LI. Now you got to remember, all elements have their browser defaults applied to them. So an anchor link has an underline applied to it. So if you do not specify an anchor link exactly, it's not gonna apply. So I have a lot of students, again, try to make changes to their navigation, but can't because they never got as specific to what selector they're going to be using. On the same anchor link, we're also going to do a text dash transform, and text dash transform has some options: capitalize, full width, lowercase, and uppercase. So we're going to take everything and let's make this all uppercase, and you can see how those were all made uppercase there automatically, even though my HTML has normal case on them, right? So kind of a fun thing you can do if you want to. You can also do some letter spacing. I typically don't use this, but let's say that this is going to be 2 rem. Oops. And you can see how this would span out. I don't think these look very great, and so I don't use them that often. So I'm going to take that off. You can also use another one called white space on our paragraph here. I'm going to look at a white space. No, normal is, again, default. No wrap is going to make it so my paragraph does not wrap around, and you can see now I've got a horizontal scroll bar that goes across. I honestly never use this, but it is another tag you can look at if you want to. Another tag, honestly, I don't recommend using is the text dash shadow. It is something that's out there, but again, I never use it, and it just adds a shadow to text. And so what we're going to look at here is if we have an XY axis, we could say on our left-right axis, we want to go to the left -5, or we want to go to the right 5. We want to go up -5 or down 5. So we're going to go down and to the right on this one. And then we're also going to add a blur. Let's add a blur of 3 pixels on our shadow just to kind of blur it out. And then you add what color you want to come through. And so we'll just add a black. And you can see here how it's just kind of ugly. It makes it hard to read. But it does have a text shadow on here. Honestly, I hate text shadow. I think they should deprecate that out. Can't say I'm a big fan one bit. Okay, so those are some of the different things we can use to style fonts. Some of them are great, some of them not so great, and just help make our page look a little bit better.